Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Giant's Healthy Innovators Live TV. My name is Barry Schreier and I'm your host. I'm the founder of Giant Health. Giant is a global community of nearly 300,000 people, and our strapline is that we serve everybody whose business is healthcare, technology, and innovation. Every week, we bring to you a variety of extremely interesting and capable and successful people who are leaders in innovation in healthcare. All of us working to achieve our vision, which is to improve the health and well-being of people around the world by facilitating health tech innovation and supporting health tech entrepreneurs. If you like these videos, we ask you please to remember to like the video on YouTube and to subscribe to our channel. And we invite all of you to come to the Giant Health event. Once a year, we run our flagship annual event. This year, it's 6th and 7th of December in London, England. And we invite everybody to come to the website, have a look at the event, and we hope to see you at the event. If you work in healthcare as a healthcare provider, you can attend for free. So the website is www.giant.health, and we'd love to meet you in December in London at the Giant Health event. So this week we have a group of very, very capable people, and we're going to be talking about some of the most important issues in healthcare and tech. To begin with, I'm going to introduce my very good friend, who's also a sponsor of Giant Health, Nathan McNally. Hello, Nathan. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you, Barry. Thank you very much.
Nathan, I'll hand it over to you, please.
Hi, thanks, Barry. So welcome, everyone. So I'm Nathan McNally, Head of Health and Life Science at Capital Enterprise, co-founder of P4 Precision Medicine Accelerator, and partner at GGV, a women's health-focused fund. Our main ethos and mission at Capital Enterprise is to collaborate and bring consortia together to make the UK one of the best places to start a business. We brought this to P4 Precision Medicine, co-founded by myself and Professor Phil Bills, the head of genomics at UCL and co-founder of Congenica, as well as other gene therapy companies. At P4, we aim to build an ecosystem leveraging the expertise residing within the NHS, academic institutes, industry to co-design together health innovations for personalised precision medicine treatment, to be investable businesses to improve healthcare for patients now and generations to come. My main aim is to put in support where needed. 4 years ago, there wasn't enough support in the health and life science space for entrepreneurs. Companies we were investing in and supporting were taking too long to gain approvals and get to market. This is twofold. We were seeing investments not returning as quickly as needed for investors, and innovations that could potentially save people's lives and treat many patients to improve population health not getting there. 4 years ago, we went through one of the biggest impactful infectious disease outbreaks we've ever seen. But there was a wealth of innovation, support, and collaboration right across the globe. We expanded our program at P4 Precision Medicine. We support globally best seed stage companies that are building personalized, preventative, predictive, and participatory technology to improve patient outcomes. We now have a satellite team in South Yorkshire accessing the North Healthcare System and ecosystem. We launched our translational cancer program, Cancer Tech Accelerator, which builds tech-enabled innovations to detect, diagnose, and treat cancers earlier. This is in partnership with Cancer Research UK, Cancer Research Horizons, Medical Research Council, Capital Enterprise, and also supported by Nuffield Health, UCL, King's, and other university partners, Roche, Lambeth Council, and other government bodies, as well as the European Regional Development Fund. The programme has nurtured some great innovations that we'll see near the future, a great impact in the world. Research institutes, and now we are seeing them moving towards making a positive impact in oncology and the precision medicine space. We have plans to continue to scale the programs and bring new ones online in the near future. So now you have a bit of a background and context of what we do. I'd like to intro the team and some of the people that are part of the program. Philippa Headley-Tacker, Alan Pooley, John Govinda, Olivia Ng. So, Pippa, it would be good to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about you.
Thanks, Nathan. So my name's Philippa Tacker. My background is in economic development, inward investment, and very much being at that interface of business support between clinical, health and care, academia and business, and policymakers to look at how we progress innovation. So I've joined Capital Enterprise to manage the P4SY programme, the first northern expansion of the P4 accelerator that Nathan co-founded in London. And this is supported by ERDF and the Northern Powerhouse. So we're very much contributing to that levelling up agenda in the north of England, looking at how we scale data-driven AI precision medtech companies and looking at how we build that vibrant business community and create employment in the sector. We've got 30 companies on the programme at the moment in this first cohort, many founded by NHS colleagues from emergency medicine, primary care, paediatrics. And we're really looking at how we navigate complex landscape and infrastructure of the medtech innovation ecosystem. So we're looking to be that glue that connects assets, people, the startup community new to the region and the north of England. So very excited to be part of the Capital Enterprise team and talking further in this conversation about where accelerator programs have a really strong role.
Thank you, Pippa. Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Pooley. I'm an entrepreneur in residence supporting the cohort on the P4 Precision Medical Accelerator Programme. My background is actually in telecoms, so I used to manage the development and technical release of the Apple iPhone. I then moved on to doing my MBA, where I was connected with two doctors. They had a mission to improve medical education within hospital, which is really hard to organise in your business hospital. So we formed OSLA to do exactly that. We managed to secure some funding through Innovate UK and other sources such as higher education innovation funding, and that enabled us to build a team. We also managed to gain spaces on the King's 20 and UCL accelerator programs. So during that time, we moved from an idea to an actual platform, which is now being piloted by the NHS, is raising revenue, and hopefully making a lot of difference in optimising teaching at hospitals. I now host entrepreneurial workshops to inspire other people to take that route. And currently, I'm on the program because I met Nathan. He explained about the not-for-profit nature of Capital Enterprise, and I've been truly inspired by some of the startups that have got some amazing ideas to make an impact in healthcare.
Thank you, Alan. Now over to John.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks for having me here. Hi, everyone. My name is John Govender. I'm another entrepreneur in residence at P4, and I wear a couple of different hats. So I'm also head of product for Seven Cups. That's one of the world's largest mental health communities and platforms based out of the States. I also advise a consultancy that I co-founded a couple of years ago called Harbour. And I've been in health innovation for over a dozen years. Seen it kind of back in the early days where telehealth was seen as radical and innovative over 10 years ago. Seen it kind of explode over the last 10 years with new funding coming in, plenty of new startups, innovations and founders pushing hard and creating amazing new things. And yeah, excited to be here and to chat about it further.
Thanks for being here. And last but not least, Liv.
Hi, I'm Livia, founder of Newcruit. So we were selected as one of 10 of the P4 companies this year. Newcruit essentially helps biotech and medtech teams bring their products to market 5 times faster by using data in the patient recruitment and planning process.
Thank you very much, Liv. Now to the questions and what we're going to discuss. So the first question I have for everyone: what do we see? What's the state of med health tech currently? Pippa first.
Oh, big question. I think we're seeing. I think I'd like to, I suppose, talk more from what I'm seeing from what the health and care system is saying to me. I think we're seeing that energy in terms of there's a move to system working. But we are in a transition phase from CCGs merging into our ICSs and into integrated care boards. So there's an appetite there, but we've got to appreciate there's a lot of work to be done in that infrastructure. I think we're seeing energy to be part of this conversation, but there's a big issue with capacity and time for the NHS to truly engage. I think, we're still in that kind of after effects, and still COVID is an issue that's affecting kind of frontline service delivery. So in terms of the medtech sector and involvement from the NHS, there's that limitation on time to participate in evaluation and get involved in due diligence on projects because, there's frontline activity going on. So I think there's more to be done in terms of how do we communicate and share information for industry to do its thing and really bring those assets to the fore in terms of this is a it's a collaborative opportunity innovation. We can't just do it in a splendid isolation, and I think there needs to be more capacity to share those details on unmet needs for industry to play its particular role.
And this is where the program sits in actually all of our programs, is that we sit in the middle of all these institutes, bring academics, we bring the clinicians, we bring the startups together to talk about kind of what can be done together, what are the time commitments, what is the funding requirements, and how to co-develop together these solutions. What are some examples of that, of especially on actually P4SY? There's been some where we've got some around the table and there's some good projects happening.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of innovation. You're right. It's more about that capacity to adopt. So we've got some interesting projects across P4SY in the mental health space, for example, and looking at that left shift towards prevention activity, population health, behaviour change. So Holly Health, for example, they are an intelligent app platform, a digitalized coach for personalized health behavior, thinking about our relationship to food and nutrition and weight gain. And they're in conversation in this region now through the duration of the programme to talk about working with primary care networks. So how do you implement and roll out that kind of resource to underserved communities as well? And they've had some very interesting data already from their early stage activity on communities that you'd have thought perhaps would struggle more with digital exclusion. They're actually finding a very good adherence to that kind of resource and that way of working. So, that's just one example, I think, of where quite quickly in the region we're finding that buy-in from different parts of the system to say, let's have a look at this and let's see where this tech that's ready to go could play a part.
And that's kind of a knock-on effect, I think, of COVID as well. I think universities, I think hospitals are really keen to innovate and collaborate together. But obviously there's backlog of frontline healthcare needs and pathways. And you just have to find the right person within the system to work with that has the time. We mentioned mental health. John, I know you mentioned 7 Cups who operate in the US. Do you see kind of that difference between the US and the UK on how to collaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know the US is a very entrepreneurial market, a lot of funding available. Maybe probably a different attitude to kind of going fast and hard and pushing hard on scale. But I think fundamentally it shares a lot of similarities as well. Patients and people are the same in every country. Most markets have fairly well-regulated healthcare systems and existing structures and stakeholders to navigate. So I think if you can be successful in the UK, you're likely to also be successful in the US. And certainly when it comes to the evolution of mental health as a space for innovation, I think we're all pretty happy to see that it's getting so much focus now. Certainly 10 years ago, it felt like it wasn't really, a topic just generally, let alone from an innovation perspective. Now it's a commonplace topic. A lot of employers are providing mental health support. That's becoming much more expected. It's a more everyday part of conversation between friends and family. And from a kind of investment and startup perspective, that's reflected in the sheer volume of new products hitting the market. That's great to see. I think Holly Health is a great example of that. And Holly Health as well is a good example of mental health being deeply connected to lots of other aspects of healthcare and life. I know they don't like the word holistic, but it is quite holistic, and our attitude to food affects our mental health. Our mental health affects our attitude to food, and so on. So I think those interconnections are being recognized, and now we're moving almost into waves 2 and 3 of innovation. The waves 1 and 2 are probably more about getting telehealth into the market, getting therapists online, those kind of just basic access. A bit of CBT started coming in. Then wave 2 was much more about self-help, a lot more CBT coming in as well. And now we're kind of moving much more into wave 3, where we're trying to figure out, certainly from a 7 Cups perspective, how do we make it easy on a day-to-day basis to get engaged with mental health? If you're lucky enough to get access to a therapist, that's maybe a weekly activity. But mental health, if you're managing it, is a regular day-to-day occurrence. And for a lot of people, you can't afford mental health either, or certainly can't afford a therapist. So trying to figure out, how do you make mental health a day-to-day thing? how do you empower everyone to help each other with their mental health? And how do we start to discover new ways of managing mental health? Because the thing that gets me excited across all subsectors of healthcare is there's tons more to discover and to figure out and to innovate on.
Yeah, and it's interesting you use the word holistic, because on P4 we use the 4 Ps of personalized medicine. So anything that makes medicine more predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. So kind of a more expanded version of what historically precision medicine was seen as, but likes Holly Health that are accessing data, likes of Newcroot that are pulling in data from diverse backgrounds or data that wouldn't have necessarily been in the system, can then be plugged in for this more holistic kind of computer model to aid prediction models, to aid personalized models, to aid prevention, and make medicine more participatory as well. So yeah, kind of all encompassing. And I see precision medicine as just medicine, and not medicine as in just kind of what we take or treat with, but the whole process of what healthcare is. Liv, you've raised recently. You're starting to gain traction. You mentioned that you've just signed a new contract today. So how is kind of the current state of the ecosystem of the environment being kind of during COVID, post-COVID to now?
I would say, I mean, healthcare systems and infrastructure are definitely still kind of far behind other industries, but I think a lot of innovation comes from these knowledge gaps we have, right? So you can almost predict what will come next by assessing what's happening in other industries, and so it's very interesting. For example, in mental health, I would not say that it's kind of equal in all countries, right? So we just built an innovation index looking at all of the existing startups in different healthcare areas around the world. And we can see that in different areas, especially when it comes to mood disorders and addiction. There is a lot of innovation in the US and UK and certain countries in Europe. But this falls to almost zero when you get to Asia, when you get to Middle East. So it's very interesting to look at where the knowledge gaps are, and therefore what might come next.
Great, thanks, Liv. And Alan, Osler is directly procured by the NHS. It's a product for the NHS. How have you seen kind of the current state of Osler kind of? You mentioned you're gaining traction, expanding, and the product's stable. Yeah, how has that affected Osler?
Yeah, so I think first of all, COVID was a game changer in that people realised the benefit of innovation, and teams were forced to work remote, and then it was an eye-opening experience. I still think we're in a particular period of challenge in terms of you can create a product such as Osler or some of the amazing products which are on the P4 program, and the benefit is clear, yet sometimes that's hard to take up. So the end user, for example, for us, is the doctor, or a teaching doctor, and they see the benefit immediately. But they're not the purse holder, and they're quite the conversation, well, it's great, but I have no money myself. So there's a disconnect there between the person you've got to meet and get hold of some funding for your product to show the benefit, and actually at the end user. So in reality, it's an ongoing challenge. And yesterday we met the founder of Third Eye Intelligence, and they've created an amazing product that actually predicts the length of stay and risk of organ failure and mortality in intensive care unit. And very much like us, they saw that there's a real need there to do that, and that is an absolute game changer. They've gone through the situation with Osler where they've managed to raise funding, they've managed to develop a product, and it seems like validation, but there's a whole pathway of steps you've got to go through before you're anywhere near to actually getting a product on the NHS market. And if we can help with that pathway, I think that's why I joined your program.
Well, that's it, right? We help build those collaborations to access that data, to prove those milestones, to develop the product to regulation, to get through those steps. And in this sector, you need a highly regulated system, right? You're dealing with patients and people's lives, so you do need to have those steps in place. We saw that things can move fast if you throw loads of money at it. If you throw loads of money at it, and kind of incentivize the system to move fast. I mean, mainly that was probably clearing up capacity and freeing people up to deliver. Kind of, yeah, acquiring all of the sequencing systems and labs to actually provide the facilities to develop the vaccine. And a lot of money actually in the system was just brought in to be able for people to work on it, and that was a key piece. We've seen the fast access regulatory pathway come in, so we are seeing new regulations come in, even in the middle of the new MHRA kind of guidelines that are allowing this fast-paced access. Pippa, have you got some insights on those new regulatory pathways?
I suppose I'd like to comment more on, because regulatory is not my sweet spot, but I'm interested to sort of understand and look at the impact of what's going to happen from the NICE early value assessment for medtech opportunities. So this is where they're looking at a rapid assessment of digital products, devices, diagnostics for effectiveness, value for money, because there is that influx of innovation. And how do you do that due diligence to sift out what works and what's the maximum benefit, and have something that's still an issue, isn't it, when you approach different parts of the sector? How do you prove that evidence and that something's going to work in very different contexts? So I'm less kind of up to speed on commenting on the regulatory bit, but I am interested in some of those value assessments and evaluations, and how you prove what you say in the tin, how you back up some of those conversations, and what's going to come out of that pilot piece of work through NICE.
And currently the grant system kind of does facilitate that evolution of product development, right from TRL 0 all the way up to go to market.
Yeah, there's some really good grant schemes out there. The thing I would say is that feedback is a gift. And I think with a lot of schemes, it's been very hard to get feedback on when an application hasn't been successful. And for people to learn, we all need to sort of use that, whether it's within building a team, whether it's within kind of talking to your customers, or whether it's going for grant funding. So feedback is vital, really, for people to understand where they're not meeting and hitting those real sweet spots from whoever they're talking to. So I think I'd like to see more confidence within health and care system to say, we don't want your innovation for this reason, or we like it because of this, and for grant people to kind of give that same element of feedback. But there's some great schemes, and I'm encouraged to see there was a CPI ABHI grant scheme earlier this year to support with regulation that, people were absolutely desperate to get hold of that, and I can hopefully see that coming again. NIHR had the FAST grants, again, influx. So there's obviously a demand for certain parts of that TRL journey. And as you were saying about regulation, it's such a big area right now, and people need a lot of hands-on support. If there's money that can be wrapped around regulatory support, I think that would be very, very welcome.
Yeah, and we've actually seen some companies kind of gain regulatory approval, some that haven't gained regulatory approval but sit in that space where they don't need to. For instance, MSK.ai got acquired by Hopco with their regulatory approval and traction within the NHS. So we're seeing kind of these companies start being acquired, and that was acquired by a US company. XChem acquired Glamorous AI, being able to model kind of predictive treatments to get the right treatment to the right patient. And we're seeing acquisitions on the horizon for our P4 portfolio in areas like imaging and drug discovery. But I'm amazed at the speed of some of the companies on our cancer tech program, even right from translational, kind of commercializing within 3 months of the program. I mean, we had 14 out of 50 projects spin out within 4 months. One raised 1.5 million within that 3 months of spinning out, and they've just received their innovative licensing and access pathway. So that's kind of 8 months in, all the way from all the way of licensing as a company, and they're out raising 8 million by the end of the year. So you can see sometimes there is the environment to be able to move fast. So John, it'd be good to kind of for you to tell us more about Harbour.
Yeah, no, happy to. Harbour is a consultancy that I helped to co-found a couple of years ago that helps bring new health tech innovation to market. And I think what I've found to be particularly interesting is that we set it up as a response for the demand that we were seeing from all over the sector. So founders and startups needing help to get their product to market because it can be challenging building a healthcare startup from scratch. There are so many things you need to be good at, more so than any other sector. Also, corporates now recognizing the value of innovation and wanting to get more involved, but the DNA of corporate still kills innovation, unfortunately. So they're trying to navigate that, and they need help figuring that out. And also, I think probably the most interesting aspect I saw was the engagement we saw with investors, and we actually had a lot of investors send us startups that they were excited about, they wanted to invest in, but wasn't yet meeting their due diligence thresholds around traction, around pathways to regulatory approval. They weren't necessarily, this is often Series A, they weren't necessarily expecting regulation to be in place yet, but like they wanted to see a pathway. And also around, particularly distribution was often a gap. And I think we'll talk a bit about procurement and funding earlier. And an often kind of gap in early stage healthcare startups is who exactly is going to pay for it. Because as Alan was pointing out, the payer is often different to the beneficiary and different to the user. That's a unique dynamic within healthcare, I think, compared to other industries. So there's a lot of complexity there. So we were seeing demand from lots of different players in the sector. I think the good news story that I saw was that demand wasn't there 10 years ago. None of those players were necessarily recognizing that the value of new innovation, new products, and innovation 20 years ago in this space was probably more incremental, I think would be fair to say. And so now we're seeing bigger steps, bigger changes, and Harbour is probably a reflection, I think, just like P4, of the support needed within the sector to bring the different players together. Again, healthcare, more than any other industry, is about collaboration. I think when you get maybe into entrepreneurship and building a company, you're maybe talking a lot about competition or who else is doing what, and how you compete with them and how do you get better. But actually, a lot of healthcare is about collaboration, and collaborating often even with your peers, with other founders, definitely. But you need to bring in the healthcare system, the NHS. You need to work with the scientific and academic community to translate new scientific discoveries into new products. The distribution ecosystem, how do you reach the market? Regulatory investors, the list, I could talk about that list for quite a while. So yeah, I think for me, I saw as a really exciting story of the amount of innovation coming through. But then also, I think a call to arms for all of us to figure out how do we put more support and infrastructure in place, more obvious pathways forward, particularly for early stage founders and products. And yeah, I see a bright future, even with, I think we're going to have a couple of hiccups in the next 18 months with the recession in UK, US, and kind of elsewhere. That's inevitable, but I do see that as hiccups in a road, whereas the overall trend is definitely one of far more innovation, a lot more funding coming in, more products hitting the market, and more money to be made.
Yeah, we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years kind of the trend of investments in the healthcare space kind of continually grow year on year. There's obviously been some hiccups in that market. We've seen some that show a bright future but may undeliver, and that's kind of leveled the market a little bit. But yeah, as you said, we're only at the start of this. We're only at where companies are collecting new data. They're still creating new data that hasn't been created before. And now we're only just seeing companies that are able to analyze that data, able to curate that data, and start finding answers within that data on how to treat people. So we are only at the precipice of what's possible. There's still a lot more to go.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, Nathan, actually, I think certainly a message I have for investors is I see a lot of investors who want to participate in healthcare. They can see the money in healthcare. They can see the impact. I think all of us have at least one personal story of how we've been impacted either by healthcare going awry. So there's a lot of desire to do good as well. So there's a lot of interest from investors, but I think a lot of them are sometimes struggle to see how to participate because it is quite technical, quite clinical. Doing DD on an early stage healthcare startup, biotech startup in the life sciences sector is different to doing DD on a taxi marketplace, for example. And I think my message to them is probably that the startups are there and the early stage support is required. But by working with partners like P4, certainly other players in the ecosystem, super connectors, other accelerators, we can be allies together and to figure out actually which are the startups that are on a really good pathway and highlighting those and helping connect them with the right investors.
Yeah, and networks are a huge bonus to a startup. I even encourage companies to go on other programs while they're on our program because they get access to those networks and they speak to more people. 30% of our portfolio is cancer, but we have numerous cancer companies on our cohort because we find that one's gone through regulatory approval, one knows a professor or a clinician that's got a certain patient group. Have they got samples that they're looking at, but they're looking at in a different way? So actually they're not competition, they're looking maybe at the same disease, but coming at it from a different way, and they're complementary diagnostics that could sit together in the pathway. So yeah, working together and collaborating is key, and that kind of network and ecosystem is super important. Liv, I know that you've joined up with a few of our companies on our cohort. Name dropping one of them, Vivan is a customer, and kind of how have you found that kind of peer network and working with other startups? How does that work?
I think that was always our kind of early adopter market. So obviously with larger kind of pharma companies, the partnerships do take longer. But also I think there is less urgency. So if you are a smaller team and you have a kind of set time frame for where you need to achieve results, each month of delay can be very costly. So I think there's huge potential to improve operations as our early adopters are more kind of smaller founding teams. And it's really exciting to kind of work with these P4 companies as well. Yeah.
And that's what investors got to realize as well, right? You can build the product, you can build your team, but sales cycles are generally longer in the space. They take longer. There's a lot of due diligence in place. There's a lot of T's that have got to be crossed and I's dotted before you can become a procured or a customer or a service provider. And we've seen kind of 12 to 18 months of contract talks before you're even on the system, let alone paid. So yeah, that's got to be taken into account as well. Alan, you work with the NHS historically and probably well-known system that takes a long time to get through. How did you find getting kind of payments out of the NHS with Osler?
Well, forgive the pun, but painful to get payments out of the NHS. So yeah, I think as John said earlier, as a startup, you've got so much to do. You've got to run a team, develop a product, pitch, raise funds, etc. And then whilst you're focused on that, someone points to you, oh, you actually got to sell it at the end of that pathway. And you don't, and then you realise, as I said earlier, it's not the doctor, it's someone else who's actually going to be able to buy it. So through connections, you've really got to understand what that person's need is. So, for example, our first procurement was we actually found a fund that they could use to fund Osler. So I think it's all about looking left and right because the obvious answer is quite often, oh, we have no money. But they just don't realise there are pots of money out there to use. So I think there's a lot of work there that we can do about how these pots, how to get hold of them and explain the benefits. So I think that was one lesson we learned is if someone says no, think about what their needs are and how you can help them get over those needs quite quickly.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, right? So that's why we use the grant system to be able to co-design and co-develop with healthcare, with academics, is because that allows some funding to again release some resource, release some time to work with that company to access patients, access data, that pots of money that they didn't even realize were accessible to them. That's why we see kind of us helping each stakeholder in the system, because we bring funding to the NHS to be able to co-develop as well. So we find that as a really important mechanism to continue to research and develop. So, Pippa, you had something to say.
Yes, I did have a small hand up earlier. Yes, I think it was just feeding on what you were talking about, peer networks there, because and that investment community, because with the rise that we're seeing in terms of women's health, femtech, and looking at recent graphs, I think the British Business Bank recently put out some graphical information about that investment in female-led businesses, and so we've been doing quite a lot on the programme as well to connect the female-led businesses that we have, and looking at that peer support and understanding how they need to think about investment and those approaches, and how we're seeing culture and society change, and how they're feeling about their value proposition and how they engage with the investment community. So I think that's been an interesting thing for myself, and the feedback we're getting from the P4SY and the P4 cohort about how we're facilitating that and getting those conversations, and some of the connections that you're building, Nathan, within the projects that you're involved with, to start horizon scanning for not only the business model and the people behind these projects, but also some of the markets that we're moving into in women's health.
Well, this is why I joined Goddess Gaia Ventures, right? So historically, female health has not been focused on. It's a hugely untapped market. There's huge products, huge science that still needs to be done in the space. You still don't understand why women sometimes react certain ways in clinical trials. That needs to be sorted out first. Obviously, hormones and variations in kind of a woman's physiology changes a lot more than a man, which is what happens. And live with kind of building that patient group for clinical trials has probably got a lot of experience on there.
Women were actually banned from taking part in FDA clinical trials until 1993. So it's very interesting, because a lot of the drugs tested in this time period were obviously not targeted towards women.
Yeah, and how can you have a personalized treatment when half the population has been segregated from participating in clinical trials? That's a whole data set that's not been put in to see the outcomes. And we're seeing where we're gathering this data in female health to start predicting how women are going to react to certain treatments, being able to tailor those, whether it's dosing, whether it's combinations, to be able to treat better symptoms and better outcomes. That brings us nicely on to where do we see the future of health, medtech and biotech? Liv, from your partners and kind of the work you've been doing, where do you see kind of health, medtech and biotech going?
I think it's moving from a vertical to horizontal industry. So I like to think of it like back in the day, not when I existed, you had this computer system, right? And so everything was linked to one company. You just have one company that sells the entire computer system, from the operating system to the keyboard, everything. And then over time, in the 1980s, it moved to a horizontal industry where you have all these different competitors at all these different levels. And so healthcare is kind of moving from this model of vertical CRO model that we saw kind of arise in the late 1990s or 2000s into now this very competitive market where you have more innovation at each level. And that's how I see things are moving.
Great, thanks, Liv. John, do you have insight into what you see coming out, and with your work with Harbour, with the work with us?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a story of growth, massive growth. There is a ton of new stuff coming through, and we're now seeing healthcare specific funds that didn't exist even maybe 5 years ago. The number of you talked earlier about the amount of funding flooding into early stage health tech, and that's highest level ever. Number of entrepreneurs and products that are kind of being explored and developed. Scientific and academic community kind of spinning out and translating. I mean, most of the universities now have their own funds and accelerators for healthcare. That didn't exist before. So for me, it's a story of massive growth. The next 10 years is probably going to be the best time ever to either be building a new healthcare company or investing in a new healthcare company, because the infrastructure and support and the other players you need in the ecosystem are going to be there far more present than ever before. And maybe from kind of like a sector perspective, I'm particularly excited about, like, I mean, it's crazy that women's health even needs to be a conversation now, that it wasn't already there from the beginning. But that's half the world's population where we're now getting a lot more focus, which is great. I'm also particularly passionate about emerging markets. I think Liv was mentioning earlier, and certainly the access to high quality healthcare is nowhere near as good in most emerging markets, and you've got some really complicated cost dynamics and kind of legacy infrastructure. But digital access is game changing. We launched a virtual primary care platform in Bangladesh, of all places, like 7-8 years ago, initially via what we called dumb phones at the time, and then transitioned over to smartphones. And I mean, people who were near the bottom of the pyramid were accessing healthcare over the phone. And it was massively increasing, access, the ability to afford it. And that was just an early, I think, a little sneak peek of what's possible. India, there's some great innovation happening there. So I'm excited about women's health. I'm excited about bringing quality healthcare to the billions of people in emerging markets, both from an access and a quality perspective and a cost perspective. Biotech is, and kind of what's happening in life sciences now. I feel it's anecdotal, so I probably don't have the data for it, but I feel like the amount of new therapies being developed, particularly from a precision perspective, new diagnostics, be they point of care or kind of within provision properly, all of that is booming. So the entire life cycle, from prevention, wellness, through to care delivery, diagnostics, analytics, etc., is every single part of that journey. There are dozens of people innovating, dozens of companies innovating, and that's going to be really exciting to see, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, the UK kind of generates some of the most research and citations in the world. If you look at the translational aspect, there's a huge wealth of IP and research sitting there that could be leveraged, maybe 5-10 years away of being developed and being able to be put in the system. But there's some really good new innovations coming from the institutes and expertise, sites of excellence within the UK. I also see more digital therapeutics being put in play. I'm seeing primary care starting to get their head around, instead of just prescribing a drug, can we prescribe a digital solution that maybe create behavior change, that puts an intervention in place that allows the patient to manage their illness by themselves and continue to do that. In long term, hopefully that generates a better patient outcome as well. Pippa, what do you see on the future of health medtech and biotech?
Yeah, I'm interested, building on this personalisation theme as well. There's been a lot of good work here nationally in terms of looking at how we use data, the social and environmental aspects, alongside that medical model of what data is available and what we use to understand people's health and well-being. So I'm kind of intrigued what we're going to see coming forward from some of the knowledge we're gaining about how we can access and use that data and that trust that needs to come from populations. And then also these new trusted research environment models for access to data. So thinking about single locations for access to anonymized data sets and how we use that for research and developing AI and that trust in AI, and kind of making sure that we're thinking about the natural or the negative consequences of bias being built into some of those AI-led solutions, and particularly around decision making. So I think I'm interested in where data sharing is now sort of gaining some momentum, and what the public sector and academia are doing in terms of that infrastructure for then us all to benefit from the knowledge that we get out of that in a safe way. and also how some of those big system integrator organizations, your large global companies, how are they very interested now in building those ecosystems, how they're very interested in supporting that dialogue and merging the boundaries between different organizations from place-based approaches.
Yeah, and this is creating a lot of solutions, but actually competition's good for a system. Take health sector out of it. Competition builds price drops and accessibility, and that's what health should be, right? It should be accessible, and that's where digital solutions come into play. It brings more access to remote systems like in the north or countries that maybe their infrastructure isn't in place, and hopefully that democratizes the access to health further. And that's what we try to do. Even though we innovate within the UK, we attract the best precision medicine companies to work in our ecosystem. But what we try to do is create globally applicable companies so they can work in other markets and create a better healthcare system for the world and globally. Alan, from your digital health perspective and your training clinicians perspective, kind of where do you see the healthcare system going?
Yeah, I do align with a lot of the group that it's really expanded and it's really open to digital solutions now. I mean, if I look back, we were on the first King's 20 cohort, and it was a little bit rare that there was a med tech amongst all the other groups that are on there. But the benefits of being on a fellow cohort and understanding they're just human and they're trying to tackle these big problems. And now you've got things like the P4, which is amazing. You've just got a complete focus on precision health. So that is really, I've seen that expanded since I've been in this space. I think I look at it as, we've now got that runway of how to get from idea to something that's being delivered and tested. It's still got a lot of hurdles on it, so it's still a steeplechase. So I think our role is, if we can help take those away, I think that's what we're here to do, really.
Yeah, and nationally the government strategy is looking at health and life sciences. I think it's third or fourth pillar of the industrial strategy. So the UK is kind of building an infrastructure for a centre of excellence globally. The UK government is putting public funding in place to stimulate this sector. So there's going to be a lot of new support infrastructure nationally. And the sector is very linked to government and national strategy on how they devolve funding. And we're seeing that in place. So we're seeing clusters being created like SC1 in Lambeth, where Guy's and St Thomas's are building a huge cluster of 300,000 square feet of life science space. We're seeing developers within Sheffield building out labs and life science space, and the universities being really collaborative. Leeds is a huge exemplar of digitization, with their whole hospital digitized, and they're looking at what other information they can bring into their system to create this connected IT infrastructure to allow for research on a holistic level. And right across the country, we're seeing that these hubs are being created for health innovation. So we've gone through an interesting time in the last 2-3 years, but the future looks bright for health and life sciences. So given that, key takeaways for investors, for startups and industry. Alan, go first. Kind of give us kind of 2 points, two takeaways.
So if I was starting again, I'd be very aware of all the different disciplines you have to get into, and it's not an easy path. It's a complete roller coaster journey, but I would say that it is an amazing roller coaster journey, and I'm very glad I got on it. And if you can actually make a difference in healthcare, it's very rewarding.
Liv.
I think we've lost Liv.
We lost Liv. Yeah, she did say our computer was going to die. John.
So many things I could say. To pick two, I would probably say more collaboration, recognizing that collaboration is actually really important from day one. And I think we've talked a bit about that today. And the other one would probably be, from an experienced founder, I would say distribution. There's a meme that goes around that second-time founders always kind of focus on distribution, and figuring out who's going to pay for it, how you're going to get into their hands. I'm really pleased to see a lot more founders talking about B2B2C distribution, and recognizing there was actually, I mean, Dr. Julian, another one of the P4 cohort, are fantastic innovators on that. And it's a great way, particularly in healthcare, to get access to customers and paying customers.
Great, thanks, John. Pippa?
Yeah, I've got three actually that John's inspired me. So firstly, there was the do your homework bit. So when you're talking to procurement, etc., there are reports, there's data out there, there's ways to kind of really think about what you need to do in advance. And particularly, I think when you're reaching out to innovation organisations such as in the NIHR, the HSNs, whoever, be quite clear on some of those entry points as to what you do, what your value proposition and what you're seeking from that organisation, because we're all stretched for time. So if you can be clear about where you fit within those organisations' scope, as an SME, you're going to get that response a lot quicker because they'll see how they can support you. I think trusts are really seeking what implementation support is there for new tech. What can you bring as a company from a resource and education, a work culture point of view? Because they can look at the IG and the tech, but what are you going to do from that people, human factors approach? And the last bit is with some trials and pilot activity. Sometimes if you pull the rug after a pilot or trial and the audience, that the population really liked it, you need to know, well, how could we keep this running? What would be that pricing structure after we've done the trial activity, rather than people just starting to enjoy a digital tool and then it's taken away from them again. So I think those are things that I would say from feedback that are quite important.
Great, thank you, Pippa. My key takeaways is build a good foundation for your business. It's been touched upon, do your homework. You've got to figure out early on who's going to pay for it. It aligns with John's key takeaway of distribution. Figuring out kind of what business models there is to be able to allow your product to be distributed, whether that is the value proposition of value-based healthcare, pay per use at a low cost, so it doesn't have to be procured at a high price. It can be signed off at a department level or clinical level, and they can use it to show the value, and that allows you early access as well to gather your data, to gather your feasibility, and to gather that your value proposition is actually there. Don't be afraid to pivot. If you find out your value proposition doesn't quite fit, or while it's in use, it's not quite living up to your expectations, change it, use that user feedback to really create a solution that is needed for your clients, for your patients, for your customers. Look at that regulatory approval pathway early. Figure out if you don't need it. If you don't need it, try and work your product into that grey area of not being a clinical device, so you can work below that regulatory approval need. And look at what the proof points, look at what investors need. If you are needing investment, look at what milestones that gets you. Don't be afraid to use grant funding to do a lot of the research and development beforehand. I've seen companies raise 5 to 10 million of non-dilutable funding, and that allowed them to develop their product all the way from spin out kind of licensing IP all the way to regulatory approval and clinical use. So don't be afraid to do that. It is a lot of work, but if you are good at it and you build a good team around you, good clinical and academic partners, and you're building something for the pathway that's needed, you should create a good precision medicine health company. So after that, I would just like to thank everyone that joined on the panel today. Pippa, thank you very much. Alan, thank you. and John. Thank you very much.